Alrighty, cherubs. So today we're going to start the next unit of study, which is the medieval period. And we start here still in the Roman Empire, late antiquity. Okay, so the beginning of Christianity happens in the Roman Empire. And so we're going to dovetail that into here and then move on into the rest of the medieval period. For today, we only have two pieces to talk about, but we've got a lot of backstory to cover, and that is how we're going to proceed for today. So we've really only got two pieces to discuss. We've got the Catacombs of Priscilla, and we've got Santa Sabina. We've got a very old Christian basilica to look at. But before we get to these, it's important to discuss kind of how we get here and what Christianity is and where it's coming from and what does it look like. Okay. We also have a bunch of architectural terms to discuss as well. So we're going to hang on to your hats, kids, because it's going to get long. All right. So today's theme is the need for redemption. So go ahead in your notes, late antiquity. We're talking about the need for redemption, and that's kind of what Christianity is about. They're going to be looking at the world as a fallen place and humanity as fallen, and so that they need someone to save them from sin and death, and that is culminated in Jesus Christ. So that's where we're getting this need for redemption. And the art and the architecture are going to reflect that. Okay? They're going to stylize their art here at the tail end of the Roman Empire. And they're going to do that for a couple reasons. And you're going to see this trend generally happening across the Roman Empire. Okay, so it's not just the Christians that are going to stylize. Everyone is. And the reasons you're going to be doing that is that it communicates more broadly. It's easier to make. You don't have to spend money training. It costs a lot less if you're stylized than if you're very specific. And you can have a greater number of artists working off of each other. And so as we get again into the end of the Roman Empire and into the Christian era, what's going to happen is the art is going to become stylized. And we're going to see that here today. But before we do that, we want to dive into this guy, Abraham, and his link to all of this. All right. Now, the Abrahamic traditions are the religions that are based off of Abraham. He's the common thread that holds all of these together. So we have Christianity, who looks back to Abraham as one of the patriarchs. Okay, he's one of the last people. The patriarchs exist from Adam all the way down to Abraham. So it's everybody in between Adam and Abraham. Christians are going to look back to him as the founding father, okay, of the faith. But Judaism is also going to look back to Abraham as the founding father, as well as Islam. Okay, so the three faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are all going to look back to Abraham as the founder of the faith. Now, who is Abraham? You may have heard Abraham and Isaac, Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Okay, the story of Abraham is that he is a man that lives in Ur. So one of those old Sumerian cities that we talked about. So he lives in Ur, and he hears the voice of God. And the voice of God says, go. Go out. He speaks with God on a number of occasions, and God is going to talk back to him and say, I like you. And because I like you, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to give you a couple things. I'm going to give you land, and that land is over here. And this land is going to be for your descendants forever. So I'm going to give you this land, and you're going to have kids more numerous than the stars. And so you'll have lots and lots of big family that goes on forever. This land is yours forever. And your people, your children, and your children's children will be my people forever. Perfect. So Abraham gets up, leaves Ur, travels across the Fertile Crescent to come down here. They take a side trip down into Egypt and then come on back. Now, Abraham, should be noted, is monotheistic, that this God is the God for Abraham. Okay? He doesn't worship any other gods. He worships Yahweh. All right? Abraham then has lots of adventures. Lots of things happen to him. He entertains some guests who wind up being angels. He goes and he lives his life. Okay, and he's generally a good guy. Now he has he's got a wife. His main wife is Sarah, and he has another wife, Keturah, and then he also has a different, well, it's a servant, a slave, that he has children with too. Okay, so the promise was intended that, as understood in Judaism and Christianity, that Sarah was the main, since she was the main wife, that the kids would come, the promised kids would come through her. Now, Sarah and Abraham get to be old, and Sarah is unable to have children, or they're unable to have children together. And so that's why Sarah gives Abraham Hagar, her servant, says, hey, you can have kids with her because you need kids as numerous as the stars, and I can't give them to you. So they have a son. Abraham and Hagar have a son named Ishmael. Now, that's when we get to the angels showing up. The angels come, these three guys come in disguise, and they say, hey, we're, traveling. And Abraham opens up his tent for them and opens up his home for them. And while they're talking, they say to Abraham, your wife's going to have a baby. And she's listening in the background. She's like, kind of, working, preparing stuff. And it's like, listening in the background. And she's like, and she just busts a gut. She falls down laughing. She's like, are you kidding me? I can't have a baby. I'm too old. That's not how this works. Maybe you haven't heard of biology, but that's not how this works. And they're like, no, you're going to have a baby. Well, she does become pregnant, and so they share a good laugh about this, and then she does become pregnant. She has a son, and his name is Isaac, and that's what Isaac means, is to laugh, because they named him after the fact that they just didn't believe it, but then they laughed about it. But hey, it happened anyway. Now, here's where the story varies. In Islam is going to look back to Ishmael as the covenant son, whereas Judaism and Christianity are going to look back to Isaac as the covenant son. Regardless, God says to Abraham, as an old man, you need to sacrifice your son to me, to perform this human sacrifice, which was abhorrent. It's really a terrible story. But we look at it as a story of faith, but it's really a terrible story in which Abraham says, okay, sure, I will kill my child because you said so. So he goes to sacrifice either Isaac or Ishmael, depending on your source. And an angel says, JK, God just wanted to see if you would do it. So that's the story of Abraham and Isaac, or perhaps Ishmael, depending on your source. Okay? So Hagar and Ishmael go off. And Isaac, again, for Christianity and Judaism, becomes the covenant son, the son of the promise. And he has a, we'll get to the story here next time when we talk about Byzantium, but the story of how Isaac finds a wife, Rebecca, and we'll come back to this chart so it sounds familiar. But Isaac gets himself a wife, Rebecca, and they have two kids, Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the younger son, but he, through shenanigans, inherits the promise. Okay, he's a trickster. He's a trickster, and so he tricks Isaac into giving him the promise, the land, the everything. And he has 4 wives, and he has 12 kids, the 12 tribes of Israel, because he changes his name, or gets his name changed from Jacob to Israel. He has 12 sons, any number of daughters. We know of 1. The text tells us of 1. And one of them is Judah, all right? And from Judah comes the Jews, all right? And from Judah is descended Jesus. Many, 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 many generations later. Okay. So that's the real down and dirty story of Abraham and who he is. Now, the Abrahamic traditions, again, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, they all look back to Abraham as the guy who makes the promise with God, the covenant. It's called a covenant, the promise with God. Now, later, the descendants of the children of Israel's kids are going to travel down, because there's a famine. They're going to travel down and live in Egypt. And they're going to stay there for a couple hundred years and eventually get enslaved, where one of them rises up and through shenanigans gets raised in the court of Pharaoh. And that's Moses. And Moses is going to lead them out, all of the descendants of Jacob, all the descendants of Israel, out of Egypt. And so he becomes the founding guy in Judaism. All right. He goes on top of the mountain. He receives the word of God, and the holy book is the Torah. All right. Jews are going to worship in the temple or later in the synagogue, and their holy city is Jerusalem. Now, Christianity is going to come out of Judaism. Okay, Jesus himself is a descendant of Judah. He is a Jew, right? He's a practicing Jew. He's going to come out of, and Jesus is going to say, like, okay, the promises made to Moses and the law given to Moses is now fulfilled in me, and we're going to go a different path now. We're going to do some different things, because the stuff that was revealed to Moses is now done, and I've finished it and I've completed it, and we're moving in a new direction. Okay, and that's how Christianity happens. So Jesus is the main founder, main person. The text is the Torah, plus the writings of the other Old Testament prophets, as well as the story of the life of Jesus and the writings of his disciples. Okay, so that's what the Bible is. The Bible is a combination of the Torah and the other Old Testament Jewish prophets. That's the Old Testament. Now, the New Testament is the story of the life of Christ and the writings of his apostles and disciples. Okay, and that's what, put those together, that's the Bible. Main place of Christian worship is going to be a church, or a bigger church is a basilica, and we'll talk about that. And their holy places are going to be Jerusalem, obviously, and Rome. Now, 600 years later, there's going to be, in the Arabian Peninsula, there's going to be a new prophet that rises up, that God is going to speak to, and same God. And he's going to say, look, my people have gone astray. And Jesus said the same thing, and Moses said the same, like, my people have gone astray, lead them back. Okay, so Muhammad is going to say, okay, I'm the last prophet. I'm the last guy that God's going to communicate with, and he's going to give me the last promise. And so he is going to write down or have written down his communications with God. And that is what the Quran is, the holy book of Islam. The revelations of God to Muhammad. All right. And Muhammad is going to say, now, okay, Judaism, you were the covenant people, but you went astray. And then Christianity, yeah, you had it right, but now you've gone astray. And so now I'm bringing you back. I'm bringing us back to the place where God wants us to be. And gives the last revelations. That's what the Quran is. And Islam sees itself as the completion then of the covenant with Abraham. They're going to worship in a mosque, and their holy cities are going to be Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. Okay, so this is real simplified. There's so much more nuance that goes into all of this. But we're speaking in simplified terms here. Okay, so here we get, again, the a Venn diagram showing us kind of the overlap and where things happen. So we have overlap between Judaism and Islam, and between Islam and Christianity, and between Judaism and Christianity, and overlap between all three. And the places that you need, or the things that they all line up, that they're all monotheistic religions that worship the same entity. Okay, that Abraham is the founder, that Moses is a prophet, that Jerusalem is the sacred space. That's the place. Okay. And they're all going to look back to these Old Testament prophets as divinely inspired. Okay. Islam is going to recognize the importance of Jesus. Now, Christianity, we're going to see here, doesn't know where to put Jesus, and finally decides to assign Jesus a place that Islam is going to later disagree with. Okay. So which takes us to Christianity. Remember that Vespasian and Titus are going to destroy Jerusalem. They're going to destroy the city of Jerusalem and scatter the Jews. The Jews are going to be notoriously rebellious against the Romans. They want to be an independent nation again. So they're going to rebel multiple times against Rome. Jerusalem is eventually, like I said before, destroyed by Vespasian and Titus, and the Jews are going to be carted out and spread around the empire. All right. But before that time, it is important to note that before that time, the majority of Jews already were not living in Jerusalem. They're going to be in Alexandria and Egypt. They're going to be in Rome proper. They're going to be all over the empire. All right. That the majority of Jews were not living in Jerusalem at that time. They were spread out already. This is called the diaspora. The last big spreading then happens with Vespasian and Titus when Jerusalem is destroyed and the temples, destroyed. So they're going to take the remaining Jews out, and they're going to go then and settle other places in the empire. Well, Christianity is going to grow out of Judaism. And for a long time, they're only going to talk to Jews because those are the people who know the prophets, that know the context of what's happening. And so they're going to go and say, hey, you need to hear the word of this new guy. I mean, we all know Moses, we know all Isaiah and Jeremiah and all the prophets, but you need to hear about this new guy, and that's Jesus. And so they're going to go, the Christians are going to go, and they're originally not even going to see themselves as different than the Jews. They are the same thing. They're just like, hey, there's this new guy. Eventually, there will be a split that the Jews say, okay, you're not part of us anymore because you're recognizing things that we don't accept anymore. But for a while, they're the same thing. And so Christianity is going to spread to the Jewish communities around the empire first. And that's important to know. And later, they're going to start speaking to the Christians are going to start speaking to the Greek speakers and the Latin speakers. So they're going to go out into this bigger world and try to convert what is called the Gentiles, okay, the people who are not Jews. Christianity is going to have, at first, a fine relationship with the Romans, but as they start to get bigger, the Romans are like, ooh, we're not cool with you guys are weird. You guys are fringe and strange. And we're not cool with that because you're not paying sufficient devotion and homage to the state, to the emperor. Okay? So that's where the problems with Rome and Christianity happens. Again, really simplified. So the earliest Christians were converted Jews. So the Christians are going to use the Jewish texts. Okay, they're going to recognize all the same prophets, all the same sacred texts. Within those sacred texts of the Jews, however, the Christians are going to see new things. They're going to reinterpret them, and they're going to see a foretelling, a foreshadowing in those Old Testament stories of the life of Jesus. Okay, and they're going to love to see duality and parallel between the two. And they're going to incorporate those old Jewish stories into their art. All right. Now, when we talk about early Christian art, it's important to know that what we're talking about is not art coming from the time of Jesus, because they were not making art. These people were not artists. They were not making art. We have so early Christian art, and that's what we're talking about today, is the art that's the oldest that we have. All right. So we're going to go ahead and I will link this video down below. This, again, is a super duper helpful. It's a TED Ed, so it's really well researched. It's really articulate, and it'll do a much better job than I just did of explaining Judaism and Christianity and Islam and kind of their relationship to each other. Now, we're going to be seeing moments in art from the life of Christ. So Christian artists are going to look later at the life of Jesus and depict his life. Okay, so we get the Annunciation. The Annunciation is the announcement. It's not that they're good at pronouncing things. Rather, it's the announcement of an angel. The angel's name is Gabriel. Gabriel shows up to a young girl, Miriam, whose name gets translated later as Mary, and says, you're special, and you are special in the eyes of God, and so special, in fact, that you're going to have his son, and that son is Jesus Christ. That's what the Annunciation is. The Visitation is when you have Mary's cousin, Elizabeth, is going to show up and say, you're having a special baby, I'm having a special baby too. Isn't this great? So that's what the Visitation is, and you see that moment in art. The Nativity is the birth of Christ. The Adoration of the Magi is when the three wise men come and they offer gifts to the baby, the infant Christ. The Presentation at the temple is when, again, he's 8 days old and he's brought to the temple and he's circumcised. The Temptation is when Christ is an adult. He's about to begin his teaching the people, and the devil comes and tries to deceive him. Towards the end of his life, there's going to be the moment where he has a friend named Lazarus, and he's going to bring Lazarus. Lazarus was dead, had died, he was buried already, and Jesus is going to bring him back to life. He has this moment a week before he dies where he enters into Jerusalem and people give him homage. They give him honor, and that's the entry into Jerusalem. And then there's the Last Supper. It's the Thursday night before he dies, in which he eats the Passover dinner with his disciples. And then he's crucified the next day. So we're going to need to know these things. And throughout the medieval period and later, we're going to see these things. The Annunciation, we're going to see the Nativity, we're going to see the Last Supper, we're going to see the crucifixion in which Jesus is nailed to a cross. We're going to see the lamentation, the people weeping over his body. We're going to see the entombment when he's buried. And when he promises that he'll come back to life and come back to visit the earth in judgment. And so we're going to be seeing that last judgment multiple times throughout the rest of the year. Characters you need to know, obviously Jesus. You need to know his disciple, St. Peter. You need to know his mom, Mary. You need to know some other disciples, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We'll talk about Saint Foy, Sebastian, and Anthony. Okay, so later saints. We'll talk about that as we move on. You do need to know the tetramorph. The tetramorph are the four morph shape, the four forms that are given to the gospel writers. Okay, now the life of Jesus, like I said, is contained in the New Testament. And the life of Jesus is detailed by four writers that are called Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the first thing, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are going to really tell and retell the same stories with varying details. John's the little outlier whose stories are a little bit different. They get depicted in art. So they're called the Gospels. Okay, they're the four writers that talk about the life of Jesus. Now they're going to be depicted in art with these forms, and these forms are an angel, a lion, an ox, and an eagle. So a man with wings, a lion with wings, an ox with wings, and a bird with wings, obviously, because it's an eagle. And they're going to, so when you see these four, angel, lion, ox, eagle, you know it's talking about the gospel writers, okay? And this happens all over the place in Christianity, and you're going to see them pop up again and again and again and again. Okay, so when you see that, then you know they're referring to the gospel writers, and you do need to know who these people are, and you do need to be able to identify them. So the angel is Matthew, the lion is Mark, the bull or the ox is Luke, and the eagle is John. So the Cathedral of the Madeleine, which is the Catholic Church downtown Salt Lake City, so on the front of the building, right above the main entrance, you see Christ, a statue of Christ, and standing behind him is the cross, and then behind that, angel, lion, ox, eagle. All right. And we go inside the Cathedral of the Madeleine. You're going to see here in the apse, and we'll talk about all this later, but you'll see the ribs are ending in these little sculptures: angel, lion, ox, eagle. And then over here, there's a stained glass window also in the Cathedral of the Madeleine that has in the window angel, lion, ox, eagle. So it happens all over the place in Christian art. It's really good. You're also going to see depictions of angels. Like I said, angels are going to show up, and they're going to be these animal-human hybrids, and they're going to show up as these humans with wings. Okay, they're going to look like this, not like this or this. Okay. Now Jesus. The early Christians are not going to know what to do with Jesus, and they're not really sure what role that he is actually taking. So they're going to fight, and Christianity is going to splinter really early on because they don't know what he's all about. Like, he's brought this message of love and acceptance that's kind of never been talked about like that in that way, and so they're not sure if he is human. Is he human? Is he a guy? Is he a god? Is he both? Is he like a demigod? Is he neither? Is he something like completely out? They're not sure, and so you're going to have different branches of Christianity spring up and argue amongst themselves about what is he. Okay, and he's going to get depicted in so many different ways, and he's going to get depicted depending on who needs him to be, who needs him. Okay, so he's going to be depicted as Swedish, as African, as Asian, as everything. And so, yeah, we're going to see a whole variety of depictions of Jesus because we don't know what he looks like, straight up. Okay? So originally, Jesus is going to be depicted as a young, beardless miracle worker, and he's going to go around with a magic wand, and he's going to be accused in early on, like again early on in like the first and second centuries, as being this magician. Other religions are going to look at him like, he's just a trickster, he's just a magician. What do you like? He's nothing special. So here he is raising Lazarus. He's depicted on a sarcophagus. He's raising Lazarus from the dead. And again, check him out. He does not look like classic Jesus that we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing any number of these depictions, and he doesn't look like that. The earliest depictions that we have don't look like that. So originally, he's going to be depicted as this young guy, no beard, toga, and he carries this magic wand. He's raising Lazarus. He's performing miracles. He turns water into wine. He multiplies bread and fish for his disciples to eat. He's going to raise a girl from the dead. And he's just got the kind of this curly, floppy Greco-Roman hair. So here we see him again in that same pose, and here he is with sheep. Okay, in this early mosaic. Galla Placida, the mausoleum of Galla Placida. So you see him, he's young, floppy-haired, no beard. All right? Look at that blue sky. This is one of the last times we're going to see a sky that's blue in art. That's important to remember. Okay? So here he is. Here's another statue of Christ. But he looks, and check this out. He also has, he's early on, he's going to be depicted as quasi-effeminate until they start to adopt a female aspect of the divine in the form of Mary. And that's when he starts to really become like really masculine too. So early on, he is effeminate. Okay, so here's an early statue of Jesus again, beardless, floppy hair, but they're also going to be looking at this guy, and this is Apollo. Do you see the similarities between the two? That they're going to visually link him to Apollo, and this is done on purpose. They're visually linking him to Apollo, okay, to give him respectability, to give him credence. He's also going to take the form, it's called a cryophoros. Now, the cryophoros is and he's usually associated with Hermes, with Mercury, where he's carrying a ram on his shoulders to offer as sacrifice. And so you're going to see early depictions. Here again is an early depiction of Christ in the cryophoros form as the ram bearer, or as the lamb bearer, because they're going to link the imagery of the lamb and the good shepherd with Christ and with Hermes, with Mercury, because Christ is going to say, I'm the good shepherd. I take care of my sheep. I take care of my followers. Okay, but that plays so beautifully along with Hermes as the ram bearer, who's offering his ram as a sacrifice, because then Jesus is later going to identify himself as the Lamb of God who is offered as a sacrifice. So not only does he get linked visually to Apollo, he's going to get linked visually to Hermes. But again, still young, beardless guy. Okay? He's only going to get a beard in art later on. So by the 300s, he starts to appear with a beard. And that's because they're going to link him with the philosophical tradition, the Greek philosophers. And the Greek philosophers are depicted with a toga, with an open chest, with a full flowing hair, and a full beard. So he gets depicted as a philosopher next. So he's young miracle worker first, that's associated with the gods and with sacrifice. Then he gets depicted as a philosopher, as a wandering teacher of the people. And we're going to see that in the Eastern Empire, that by the 500s, 600s, the look of the beard is pretty standard. But that standardization is not canonized in the West until the Renaissance, right? So here we have a depiction of Christ surrounded by his disciples, but he's in the guise of a Greek philosopher. All right. And he's going to get the halo because he's also going to be associated. They're going to start to give him imagery of the sun gods. So this is the guy on the left here. This is Sol Invictus. This is the Roman sun god. But he's also going to get it, like I said, associated with Apollo, who's also a sun god, as well as Helios. And here is Jesus riding the sun chariot. And we know that this is Jesus because this is from a Christian tomb. They're going to be depicting in this Christian tomb Old Testament stories, but in this same tomb they're also going to be linking him to other like Greco-Roman gods. So they're like making these layers of references on top of each other, like layer upon layer upon layer of references and cross contextualizations and recontextualizing these images to give the form of Jesus acceptability to a Greco-Roman audience. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, this is Jesus riding the sun chariot with the rays of light pouring out of his head, like Sol Invictus. So then we get to later, like really European Jesus. The idea of the halo is just, it's embedded. It's part of the story. And see, even here, he doesn't have a beard because neither does Sol Invictus. The kicker is when he starts to become enthroned. When Jesus is depicted as being enthroned, and that's when you really get the long flowy beard. That's when you get the long flowy shampoo commercial hair. And that's because he's being finally associated. He's not being associated with the Roman emperor. He's being in a big chair because the Roman emperor didn't sit in a big chair. He's being associated with Zeus, with Jupiter. He's being called a god. Okay. So that's the Christian's ultimate flex. Like, haha. He is not just like Apollo Hermes. No, Zeus. He's the main god, and he supplants all the main gods of everyone else. And so that's how we get to the look of Jesus with a beard and long flowy hair. And that's how this look becomes canonized. All right, so here's a Renaissance picture of Jesus. Michelangelo paints, and we'll see him later. But notice, no beard, because again, it only happens. He only gets the beard in the West finally, like completely, perfectly, always by the Renaissance. Okay. So again, the representation of Jesus, we don't know what he looks like. This ain't what he looks like. This is just a remix, a retread of images that have been of a standard that was set many centuries ago. Okay, now the thing about this image is that it's also a thinly veiled portrait, self-portrait of the artist. Okay, and whether that was intentional, I don't know. It could very well have been accidental. Myself, I painted a picture of the crucifixion, and with all humility and with all, I just wanted to paint a picture like that. And what happened was then all my friends started to look, why did you paint yourself as Jesus? And I didn't. And I still don't see it, but my friends do, and my wife does, and my families, and they all make fun of it because they're like, why did you paint yourself as I wasn't trying to, but it just happened. And that is very easily what could have happened here. But watch this. again, this is a very thinly veiled self-portrait. So again, with no disrespect to the artist, to Del Parsons, it is a self-portrait. Okay, that's the artist. So we can see that, again, we have no idea what Jesus looks like, and that's really the point. Which leads us now to the art. Haha, we finally got here. Whew. Okay, now the Christians are going to start burying in the catacombs below the city of Rome and other cities as well. And they're going to start doing it down there because they're a persecuted group. The Romans aren't going to really look favorably upon them. Now, the Romans knew they were there, but they're like, okay, yeah, you whatever, that's fine, you can be down there. They weren't hiding out from the Romans. And they certainly weren't living down there. Because gross. This is where they're going to put their bodies. Now they want to not cremate, which was the tradition, the Roman tradition at the time, because again, borrowing from the Egyptians, you need a body to be resurrected. And so you want to keep your body intact. Because they were persecuted, they couldn't openly have their funerals outside. So they were going to bury down below. And again, like I said, the Romans are going to know that they're there, but they're like, okay, fine, you can have that space. No one cares. They're going to run for 60 to 90 miles below the city of Rome. Now, again, this was not a living place. The Christians weren't living in the catacombs, and they weren't down there. I mean, they would go down there for private devotion and to bury, but really it's going to be moist and stinky and dead bodies and gross. So they're not going to dark. And so that's why the art that we're going to see down there isn't going to be super high quality either, because of these really gross conditions. Okay. As many as 4 million dead were buried in the catacombs at their height. So hopefully when you see these, like, some are going to be more elaborate. These are more simple parts of the catacombs. Oops. All right. And they're going to be just these kind of shelves in the walls. All right. They're the loculi, they're called. And hopefully you're going to see a resemblance here. This is a Christian burial, but hopefully you're going to see a resemblance to the Etruscans. Okay? So this Etruscan, like, house form here in this Christian tomb. All right. So you can see the fresco paintings here. You can see, and we know this is Christian because they're going to be using very Christian imagery. For example, the peacock. The peacock is a Christian symbol early on. It isn't anymore, but it was early on because the story was that a peacock, when it died, it never decayed. And so they're going to see that as like a promise of resurrection. Okay, so the peacock becomes an early symbol of Christianity for that reason. Right? Now, in the catacombs, like I said, we're going to be seeing lots of imagery, and it's going to harken back to the Old Testament. So here we're getting up this picture of Adam and Eve. Now, they're leery about depicting Christ openly because we still don't know yet in Christianity what he is. Is he God or not? Or is he something in between? We're still not sure what he is. And because of that, we don't want to depict him outright. Because there's that second commandment that Moses is going to give that says, don't make graven images, especially don't depict the divine. And so they're not sure, is Jesus God or not? And so they aren't going to openly depict scenes from his life yet, because they're going to be nervous about that. It's going to make them uncomfortable. So what they're going to do rather is depict moments from the Old Testament that point to Jesus. It tells the story of Jesus without telling the story of Jesus. Like it's the story of Jesus in disguise. So, for example, we're going to be seeing here Adam and Eve, and here we have Adam and Eve, and they're at the tree of knowledge, and we've got the serpent, tempting them with the fruit. Now, the reason this gets depicted is because it's setting up the need. Uh, the later writers, the disciples who are going to be writing letters, Paul and Peter, etc., are going to look back to Adam and Eve and say, Jesus makes up for what they did. Okay, they brought sin and death into the world. Jesus makes up for that, and Jesus conquers those things. So Adam and Eve get here depicted to say why Jesus is essential in the first place. Now you can look at the style. Do you see the contrapposto? All right, but you can also see that it's really smudgy, that they're not putting a ton of detail into these forms, into these paintings, because, like, if you think back to the Roman in Pompeii, the Roman paintings, the house paintings, those were a lot more detailed and a lot more vibrant and a lot more involved. These are not going to be the top quality artisans painting in the catacombs. And that's important to notice, because they are working in these terrible conditions and for this persecuted group. So the top artists are not going to be painting for them. So we're getting this lesser tier artists, more stylized and more rushed work. Right. We're also going to be seeing Daniel. Now, Daniel, the story of Daniel from the Daniel and the Lion's Den from the Old Testament. Daniel was a prophet who was persecuted for worshiping the one God. Okay. Praying to the one God, and was told, like, hey, if you don't stop, you're going to be punished. And he did not stop praying to the one God and was thrown into a den of lions, like a den of lions in the pit, in the ground. Okay. And then, but the king loved Daniel, and so came out the next day hoping that just to see what was left, and hopefully, a miracle. And Daniel was still alive after being thrown into this den of this pit of hungry lions, because the story goes God protected him. Now, Daniel gets depicted here because it's Jesus without showing Jesus. That Jesus was placed in the tomb in the ground and was brought back out, 3 days later, back to life, was resurrected. Daniel was placed in the ground, certain death, and came out alive. Okay, so they're telling this. The story of Daniel tells the story of Jesus without showing Jesus. Again, contrapposto stance. Look at the lions, and they're kind of just like, with their whiskers. I mean, they're kind of like just cats. They're really quite sweet, but they pose no real dangerous threat to Daniel. Now, the last guy that we're going to see here is we're having this guy he's on a Greek trireme, and he's getting thrown overboard. Now, again, you can see how quick the painting is. It's not this finished, polished, beautiful piece. It is quick. And when we see a quick painting, we call it painterly. It's smudgy. It's called painterly. And we're really not going to see this again until we get to the Impressionists. Okay, so that word painterly is going to come back to haunt you. But you see here, they're throwing this guy over the boat, and there's this monster here who looks like Falcor the Luck Dragon, but really it's a sea serpent. It's a monster that's going to devour Jonah. So the story was that Jonah was called by God to, let me pull up he was called by God to go talk to the Assyrians. Remember, the Assyrians were like the scary people of the ancient world, of the Bronze Age. They were terrifying, and if they didn't like you, they would butcher you. He was told to go tell the Assyrians, go and repent. So he gets on a boat, rather than going to, living in Palestine, rather than going to Assyria, which is, a couple weeks journey, just around the corner. He catches a boat and goes to Spain. Literally the end of the planet, like as far away as is known, like literally the edge of the earth. He's like, oh, you want me to go to Syria? No. takes off and goes to Spain. And they're going to be like, there's this storm that arises. And the people on the boat are like, oh, who offended what God? Who offended a God? Who is it? Look around. Was it you? Well, who offended which God? Because we're all going to die. And Jonah's in the corner of the boat like, uh-oh. So he's like, me, I did it. Oops. And so Jonah then, they're like, you know what we got to do, right? And he's like, yep, throw me overboard. So they throw him overboard in the hopes of appeasing the god and saving everyone else's life. And he gets swallowed by, it says a big fish in the text. It's been later reinterpreted as a whale. Here it's being interpreted as Falcor, the luck dragon, but he's going to be swallowed by a monster. He's going to be inside the sea monster for 3 days, wherein the sea monster then spits him back up on land, and he's like, okay, I feel bad. I'm going to go and talk to the Assyrians. So again, the story of Jesus, without showing the story of Jesus, is Jonah, because he goes and dies, is buried within the monster and the ocean, the water, buried for 3 days, and comes back unharmed, like Jesus, who dies, is crucified, buried, 3 days later, comes back to life. Jesus without showing Jesus. Okay, so our first piece are this specific set of catacombs, and this is called the Catacombs of Priscilla. And within these catacombs, so we're getting, this is called the Greek chapel, all right, because it has a Greek inscription above. We're getting this section right here with these lunettes. This is a roof painting. And then we're getting this section right here. Okay, so here in the Greek chapel, in the catacombs, right? This section of the catacombs in which people are going to be buried. But here's a place for devotional worship that you can come down here, make offerings and say prayers, etc., especially as people pass away. Now, here again, we're getting these people. Now, what these people were doing with the jazz hands is that they are praying. Rather than praying in the Mesopotamian way, they're going to be praying like this. They're offering prayers. Again, it's a symbol of humility and devotion, of non-aggression, of peace, of I have no weapons, peaceful, and offering their devotions to God. Now, in the center, you're getting, I hope that looks familiar to you. Again, look at this it's really painterly, so it may be hard to tell. But what's happening here, this is the Cryophoros. This is the ram bearer, the lamb bearer, the good shepherd. Okay? So they're showing us the good shepherd, the person who's making an offering of these sheep, who's protecting the sheep so that they can be sacrificed later. All right. So this is Jesus. Again, without showing Jesus. They're not trying to show Jesus. It is Jesus, but they're like, wink, wink. It's not real, it's the Cryophoros here. You see his contrapposto stance. You see he's wearing just this short tunic. You see that he's beardless, and he's holding the sheep in this very loving and protecting way. Okay, we've got the other animals, the other sheep around him. Now in the lunettes, you're getting the story of Jonah. Okay, so here's Jonah getting eaten by the whale or the sea monster. Here's the sea monster spitting him out. And then this one, so the further story, okay, so Jonah goes and he talks to the Assyrians, and he says, God's going to destroy you if you don't repent. Job done. Check. So what he does is then he's like, haha, now I'm going to go watch he's like, the fire's going to rain down from heaven if you guys don't turn around. And so what he says is like, okay, fine, I did my job, God. See, I did what you wanted me to do. So he goes up and he climbs a hill that overlooks the city, and he builds this little fort, this little canopy for himself just to get out of the shade or get out of the sun. And he's like, haha, now I'm going to watch the fireworks. I'm going to watch them get destroyed. And he waits and he waits and he waits and he waits. And nothing happens. And he's like, what the? I thought that I was promised fireworks, that these people would be destroyed. And God's like, no, they repented, fool. And that's exactly what I wanted to happen. That's why I sent you. I don't want to destroy these people. And he's like, Jonah, come on. I expected better of you. And so he gets chewed out by God. And so that's what's happening down here is he's sitting in his little canopy. He's sitting in that little thing that he built for himself so that waiting for Nineveh to be destroyed. So again, we're getting the orants, the prayers, the story of Jonah, and the Good Shepherd. So again, you can see super painterly, but super classical too. Okay, here's a side view, and you can see here the dead bodies. So this would have been on the roof, on the ceiling in this part of the catacombs with the dead bodies. All right. So again, that quality of the fresco is not great because these are not good working conditions to work with. And it illustrates the parallels between the Old and the New Testament. And it talks to them about why they need Jesus. And it gives them a reason to, or an ability to show Jesus without being disrespectful to the image of God. Okay. And here we get the prayer. It's called the orant. And here, see the peacock? See the peacock? Okay, again, Christian symbol. We're getting other birds depicted as well, but there's that peacock. We get the prayer, and here we get people listening to the prayer, and we get a woman here with a baby. Now, they've speculated perhaps this is an early version of Mary with the Christ child, or perhaps it's just a woman listening. We're not sure. Okay. Right. So now we're going to go above ground. So this is a Roman basilica. Like I mentioned before, this is a Roman basilica, and it's a government building, and people gather here, laws are passed, etc. Now, this is the Basilica Nova that was built by the Emperor Constantine. And you can see here in the apse that there is a giant statue of Constantine. Okay? And you enter from the side. So like I said before, that the basilica form, the Christians are going to use this as the basis of their churches, because once they start building bigger structures and start getting stop hiding, because originally their churches are just going to be in people's houses, and they're going to paint on the walls in people's houses, kind of like in these back rooms in people's houses. Once they start gaining some respectability, once we get Constantine happening, who says, okay, Christians, you're cool. They're going to start to build bigger buildings, and they're going to use the basilica form to do so, to build bigger houses of worship. Okay, so here is a basilica form, and this is the plan for Old St. Peter's. Now, St. Peter was the main guy that took over after Jesus died and was resurrected, came and left after Jesus was gone. Peter took over. Okay, now Peter goes to Rome eventually to teach, and is arrested, and then he's killed. He is crucified. He winds up being crucified upside down. And then he's buried. Christians are later going to build this church on top of where he was buried. And interesting enough, so there is a church still there. It's St. Peter's Basilica. It's not this church. In the Renaissance, they're going to tear this one down and build a new one. But they have found a, first century man buried under the altar in current St. Peter's Basilica. So whether it's Peter, who knows? But they're going to take that basilica form, okay, with an apse back here at the end. And rather than enter on the side, they're going to enter at the west end. Okay. And originally, it's going to have this very Roman feature of the atrium. And a non-baptized Christian could enter into through the gatehouse and enter into the atrium, but couldn't go into the basilica proper. You were stopped by the narthex, and that's what the narthex is here. It's this projection. It's kind of this porch that was built on the west end of a church, and was kind of the last place that an unbaptized person could go. Okay. So I'm going to link this video down here in the description, and it's just a reconstruction of St. Peter's Basilica. Okay. So you get the main section of the church with the side aisles. You get colonnades down the side. You get windows up at the top and a wooden roof and a big old apse at the back. Now, at the beginning of the apse, that's where you're going to find the altar. That's where you're going to receive the communion. That's where they're going to offer the bread and the wine. Okay. Old St. Peter's doesn't exist anymore because, like I said, in the Renaissance, they're going to tear it down. It's 1,000 years old. They're going to tear it down and be like, we need a bigger, newer church. So, but one of the churches that still exists from this period. Now, check out the date. 422 to 432. This is an old Christian church. And this is called Santa Sabina. And they've given us 3 images. They've given us the floor plan. They've given us an outside view. So here you can see the windows and the apse. Here are the side aisles, and then a shot from the inside. So we're going to look at these more closely. So it's an axial form, which means that it's shaped like a rectangle. Okay, so when we say axial form, we mean a building shaped like a rectangle. We have the main section of the church, the main aisle, the center component, and that's called the nave. The nave is that main component. Now, early Christian churches are going to follow the Jewish way of worshiping. You stand. And if you go to a Greek Orthodox church, they're still going to stand. If they're really old-timey, they're going to stand and not have seats. So in the nave, you're going to stand to listen to the sermon, to pray, to participate in the worship service. But here's the kicker. Again, they're going to follow the Jewish style in which men and women worship separately. So the ladies are going to worship in the side aisle in the old basilicas. Men are going to worship in the nave. Women are going to worship in the side aisles. Sorry, ladies. You got a worse view because you got to see past the columns. The altar is up here where you receive the communion, the Santa Cena, the bread and the wine, the sacrament, and then the apse. Okay. And we have our narthex down here, which is gonna, be the place where the last place where you can go in if you're unbaptized. So here we get the windows. Now, again, those windows, and we saw these in Egypt, but we're going to see here, obviously, and this is called the clerestory. It's these high windows that let in this light into the structure. All right. So that here's the clerestory, and here's the side aisle where the women worship, and here's the apse. Now, here's the interior. Here's the altar right there. Apse, arch, triumphal arch, getting Jesus depicted. Now look at the roof. There's no vault. It's just a flat roof. And we'll talk later as we go through later churches. We're going to talk about vaults, barrel vaults, rib vaults, groin vaults, etc. But this one has no vault. It just has this wooden roof. We have the clerestory windows. Here's the nave. Here's the side aisles. Notice there's no benches. Again, they haven't put in any benches still. With this running arcade running down both aisles. Now check out the columns. See how fancy they are? They're Corinthian capital, excuse me. Now these columns are what are called spolia. Spolia, 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 which are like the spoils of war. And that's exactly what they are. They were taken from a Roman temple and purposefully installed in a Christian church to say, the spoils of a cultural war. My God is better than your God. That's exactly what they're doing here. And we're going to see this again and again. Okay. So this is Santa Sabina, one of the oldest Christian basilicas that is still extant. And again, you can see here from the side aisle, here's the altar up here in the apse. So you can see that the view is much more limited over here in the side aisle because of those columns. They're going to have a much worse view. Sorry, ladies. Eventually, Christianity is just going to say, yeah, we all worship together. That's fine. And the side aisle is going to take on a different purpose. But for now, that's what it is. Okay? It has no transept. The windows are still not made of sheet glass. That's still not a thing yet. There's going to be a very, very, very thinly sliced stone. Okay. This is supposed to be long. Sorry, I'll go back and fix this. It's supposed to be long, not ong. An axial plan. Again, it's a Christian worship space. It's modeled. It takes that form from Old St. Peter's. And again, it contains those spolia, those columns that say, my God's better than your God. Okay. Now, it's important to notice this, and I neglected to say this. It is meant to be very beautiful on the inside, but very plain on the outside. And that's supposed to be like the Christian soul. On the outside, you're not supposed to be loud and ostentatious and bombastic. You're supposed to be a very quiet and humble and passive and meek person, but on the inside, full of beauty for the love of God. Also, so it reflects the Christian soul. But it also, it says that here in the mundane world, this is secular space. So we're not going to put all the pretty on the outside because that's the gross world. You want to save the pretty for the sacred space, for the inside, because here you're in the presence of God. So that's where the pretty is, not the outside. How doesn't matter. That's the gross, mundane world. You don't want to mix sacred and secular. Okay, so the outside, secular. Inside, sacred. Okay. Now, the fun architectural terms that you need to know. The side aisles. I'm going to scoot myself out of the way. The side aisles. Go back. Okay, these are the side aisles. So you should have flashcards for all of these things. Again, open areas on the other side of the arcade or the columns. The arcade is a series of columns that hold up arches. The apse is a semicircular projection that sticks off of the back or the east end of a church. An axial plan is a rectangle plan. The catacombs are subterranean burial places generally used by the Christians in the Roman era. The clerestory are the upper windows in a building that let in the light. The narthex is that projection off of the western end of a church that's going to be used as kind of the buffer zone between the baptized and unbaptized. Like, baptized can go further, unbaptized can't go further. And eventually it's just going to see right here in this image, it's a porch. And later it's going to get enclosed in and it's just going to be the foyer. That's why you have a foyer. The nave is the central aisle. And again, early on, we're just going to stand and worship here, the main aisle of the church, nave, side aisle, and our evangelist symbols, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Angel, lion, ox, eagle. And that's it for today. So we have the Catacombs of Priscilla, we've got Santa Sabina, and then we've got the architectural terms that deal with those things. So that is our lecture for today, and I hope that you've enjoyed this long and extensive view through journey through Christianity and what it looked like for the earliest Christians. Next time, we're going to continue in we're going to talk about the fracturing of the Roman Empire and talk about Byzantium.